God in the form of the indwelling Guru calls to us to awaken to him. How will he find us when he speaks?
Awake and ready.
And when he asks us to dedicate ourselves to him ever more perfectly, how will he find us?
Awake and ready.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend beloved God,
Friend beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
and saints of East and West,
and saints of East and West,
join us in a festival of light.
join us in a festival of light.
Awaken us to your living presence.
Awaken us to your living presence.
Teach us to surrender to thy divine will,
Teach us to surrender to thy divine will,
walking the path toward thee,
walking the path toward thee,
toward freedom,
toward freedom,
self-realization.
self-realization.
Oh,
Peace.
peace. Amen.
Amen.
Have your seats and some music. Inwardly focused, let's listen to these words on the quality of awareness in the book Affirmations for Self-Healing by Swami Kriyananda. Describing awareness, he writes, "Awareness deepens the more it is centered in itself, but the farther a person's interests extend outside himself, the thinner the supply line of his awareness becomes." If a person's consciousness is centered outwardly in things, it takes on those qualities which it attributes to those things. Jewelers, for instance, often have bright eyes. People with no sense of higher values might have dead eyes. One needs to learn to change one's focus from what he is aware of to what he is aware with. One needs to become more aware at the source of awareness, at the deepest center, God. Through this awareness, one's enjoyment even of the surrounding world becomes intensified 1,000-fold. Let's affirm together phrase by phrase. I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith.
I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith.
For I know that as I view others,
For I know that as I view others,
so will I myself become.
so will I myself become.
I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith.
I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith.
For I know that as I view others,
For I know that as I view others,
so will I myself become.
So will I myself become.
Now in a whisper to the subconscious mind, I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith. For I know that as I view others, so will I myself become. Fix your gaze once again at the spiritual eye and affirm only silently but with deep faith this affirmation. I behold the world with eyes of calmness and of faith. For I know that as I view others, so will I myself become. Infuse me, Lord, from my deepest center with thy joy. Make me aware of thee, my divine beloved, in all that I behold.
Today's reading is week 40, Surrender Lies Victory. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. A case might be made for surrender as a path to victory in worldly conflicts, the way of passive resistance, for example, in preference to armed resistance. But our point here concerns a higher kind of surrender, the surrender of our deluded egoic will to the wise and almighty will of God. Human will is, as Paramahansa used to say, guided by whims and fancies and limited understanding. The divine will is in harmony with every level of reality. Though the divine will sometimes appears to us at first to be wrong, it proves always, eventually, to be for our own highest good. Human will is inconsistent. It leads us one day to success, another to disaster. The divine will, when we surrender to it completely, though it is not always easy to do so, always brings to us deep inner peace and joy in the end. Jesus Christ demonstrated this perfect surrender to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was captured and imprisoned preparatory to his crucifixion. He went apart from others to pray, and asked them to pray also. But when he returned to them, he found them asleep. Out of his love for them, he excused them, saying, "The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." He then urged them again, "Watch and pray." Their weakness in those circumstances was particularly sad, and the disciples themselves must have regretted it bitterly later on. We all know the symptoms of human weakness, though we may excuse ourselves in saying, "Well, after all, I'm only human." But what are the signs of true strength? We find in all cases these are the fruit of a life wholly surrendered to God. The Bhagavad Gita lists these signs in the 16th chapter. Humbleness, truthfulness, harmlessness, patience and honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, control of self, contempt for sense delights, self-sacrifice, perception of the certainty of ill and birth, old age, frail mortality, disease, the ego's suffering, and sin. Detachment, lightly holding thoughts of home, children, husband and wife, those ties which bend most of us. An ever tranquil heart, heedless of good or adverse fortune, with the will upraised to worship me alone, unceasingly, loving deep solitude, and shunning noise of foolish crowds, calm focus on the self perceived within and in infinity. These qualities reveal true wisdom. Prince, all that is otherwise is ignorance. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nayaswami Padma, and along with my husband Nayaswami Rhiman, we're the spiritual directors at Ananda in Seattle, and we're very grateful to Nayaswamis, Dharma Devi, and Narayan to invite us here, and we've invited them back in about a month. So it's a fun exchange that we get to have. Before I start, I actually wanted to introduce you. We're here with a pilgrimage of, well, including Narayan and Dharma Devi, we were 37. And amongst those were all but one of our light bearers from Ananda in Seattle. So could the other light bearers from Ananda in Seattle please stand for just a moment so you can meet them and greet them afterwards? Thank you. Great to all be here. Actually, the only reason we have one back in Seattle is because he just moved back up there from Ananda Village, and we're grateful. It's Mahadev Kushler. So anyway, I want to start with Whispers from Eternity. Demand for balance. O Spirit, teach me to pray and worship incessantly with deepest concentration. O Spirit, balance my meditation and devotion, and purify my devotion with all surrendering love unto Thee. That's what we want to talk about this morning, briefly, all surrendering love of God. I remember years ago when Swami Kriyananda was hospitalized at Ananda in Italy. If anyone is new here today, Swami Kriyananda, Swamiji we call him lovingly, is a direct disciple of Yogananda and the founder of Ananda. And Yogananda's teachings is what we practice here at Ananda. Anyway, he was hospitalized in Italy, and he was sharing with Rhiman and I that at a certain point there was a nun taking care of him. She was like an assistant nurse who was taking care of his needs in the room, and she was very elderly. He said it seemed to him she must have been about 80. He said, but his heart just sang with joy because he felt the vibration of her surrender to God, having lived a life in surrenderance to God. A different practice, a different path, same God, one God, and those who attune themselves with God recognize that divinity and that peace and that sense of total dedication and surrender to God in one another. It's not a simple matter. It's one of the biggest challenges on the spiritual path because those doggone stubborn egos of ours, you know, they just want to be noisy and be at the front of the pack. And so that surrender, and so often I do a lot of counseling, and I'll have people come to me and say, I don't know what to do next. I was thinking I could do this, or I could do this, and I'm not sure what I want to do. And I think to myself, you're asking the wrong question. You know, and so I try to say gently, have you considered asking God what He wants you to do? You know, because ultimately that's where we want to go when we want to be in God remembrance all the time, to be attuning ourselves and surrendering ourselves to God's will. And it becomes harder and harder the more serious we are on the spiritual path. The more we're tested, the more we have to give up. And it seems like we have to give up, but it's only the ego that feels a sense of giving up. The soul feels enriched and blessed in that process. I remember When I first read the autobiography of a yogi, I was 19 years old, going to Cal Berkeley, and I felt the blessings, a certain vibration in that book. And then shortly after, within a couple of months, I heard about the fledgling new community of Ananda starting in the Sierra foothills. So I made my way up there, and I felt that same vibration, exactly that same vibration in Swami Kriyananda. And I thought, this is what I want. You know, it's a universal vibration. It's also specific to the expression that Yogananda had, but that was a universal expression. Nevertheless, his vibrations were in it, and Swami Kriyananda spent a lifetime attuning himself to that vibration. And it wasn't anything like, here I am vibrating, you know. It was just, it's a process that happens as we surrender to God's will. I was just reflecting that this is 2018, this is the 70th year anniversary of his discipleship to Yogananda right here at Hollywood Church. He first met Yogananda. I'm not going to go into that story right now, I don't have time. But my point is that by attunement to the vibration of God through the Guru, through the teacher, because it's easier for us in human form to be able to do that, we begin to vibrate in that way. And so what does it mean to be in surrender to God's will? Well, everything that brings us closer to God is God's will. And everything that doesn't bring us closer to God is the other. Is the other thing, you know? So, is it bringing us closer to God? Do we feel more peace, more calmness? It was interesting, in 1935 and 6, Yogananda went back to India for a visit. And he talked about looking for a temple there. And I was thinking about this because Narayana and Dharma Devi chatted with us briefly last night. And then we had to prepare service, and I said, I hope our chat brings me some idea of what to talk about tomorrow. And it did. So he's back there in 35 and 36, and he's looking for a temple. And he ended up finding it in a completely different place than he originally thought it was going to be. And he was an avatar, you know, but he had to keep surrendering to God's will and an attunement with God. And he says, you know, even when we sincerely feel the divine presence and inner guidance to move in a certain direction, even when we have that and it's very real, we still tend to start from that point on planning and plotting and letting our ego take over the process to get there. And God may be taking us in a different direction. And we need to listen. And we had an experience like that I wanted to share with you at our temple in Bothell. We have a beautiful temple for any of you who've been to Ananda Assisi and the one that's being built at Ananda Village right now. We have one like that in Seattle, and we had the initial seed money. We were looking for the location, and let me tell you, that's a really difficult job to find not just the right location, but God's will and God's wish for the right location. Because the mind can say all kinds of things about what it is we're looking for, but you know, God may take us in a different direction. And so we found this beautiful 5-acre property not far from our residential community, but it was sort of hidden away in a residential neighborhood. We had to spend $40,000 in initial tests to do, engineering tests and environmental things and stuff, before we could even begin to get approval for the special use permit. So we had to buy into it, and we did. And the local residents there just fought us tooth and nail. It was a very difficult process. Swami Kriyananda came to visit, and Rhiman and I from the beginning had felt it is a beautiful property, but it's hidden, and we're in a city center, and we needed people to find us easier. And so we were alone with Kriyananda at a certain point. We had shown him the property that we were working on, and then we said, can we show you this other property that's also for sale, because we're sort of feeling like it needs to be more public, more out there. And he came and looked at it with us, the other piece, and then I remember I looked at his face when he said this. He looked out, sort of his gaze was way off in the distance, and he said, let's see what Divine Mother does. Let's see how she guides us. He wasn't going to say yeah or no, He was going to make us go through it. Well, within a short time, very short time, we had another public hearing and another painful experience with the residents in that area. And the next day, Rhiman and I decided to go and have a meeting with the mayor of the town. And we're sitting down in that meeting, and we said, you know that we have the legal right as a church to be able to build there. And he said, oh yes, I know you have the legal right. He said, but the people in this town would rather live next to a tavern than a church. And he said, you're going to have to fight us in court to get the permission. Well, that was our answer. It was a very expensive answer. I mean, we walked away from there and we said, let's go keep looking, even though it meant we lost all that money we put out front. We kept looking and then found the piece where we ended up, and everybody said when we got there, this place feels happy. It was raw land with an old building that had to be destroyed on it, taken away, and it just felt right. And it was on a very busy street on the north end, and it turned out it was right where the two main highways meet, within 2 blocks off that the freeway, and one exit where those 2 highways meet. It was perfectly situated. And so that's where the temple ended up. But that's not where we started. And it was a process to go through to try to tune in. I was for the first time, I've been here a number of times in Southern California to Master's places, Yogananda's places. But I never got this insight, as I did the other day, that really the Hollywood Church is the main place where he has a church in this area where he greets the public. Mount Washington is an ashram, and I don't know if they do services or not, but if they do, it's just for their monastics. Hollywood Church is where they greet the public. The Lake Shrine didn't start off having a chapel at all. Eventually, a small chapel was created there, and eventually now a bigger church. But it didn't start off that way. So all those centers were his centers where people could come and feel the inspiration, but they weren't necessarily churches to begin with. And so as this work expands, it will take different shapes. And building the church or finding the church first is the most important thing, because that's where spirit can congregate. But be open to the idea in this big place. When we first got to Seattle, we thought we would need many parishes because people don't like to drive. too long in traffic to get there, and LA has that in spades. But it doesn't mean that we have to build parishes like the Catholic Church. It can mean beautiful parks or centers or other forms. I don't know what all the forms are, but Divine Mother knows. So we want to tune in and surrender to the Divine Mother.